This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. The sexiest word you hear thrown about, and I'm guilty of this, entrepreneurship, to be an entrepreneur. 99% of the population, I don't care what country you're in, what state, what city, 99% of the population, not entrepreneurs. Maybe that's wrong, I'm guessing, but I'm going to say 99% based on my own sampling of just regular people over the last 20 years. Now, I thought this was going to be different. When Netscape went public in 1995, I thought there would be an avalanche of entrepreneurs. And perhaps there was during the dot-com bubble, and perhaps the dot-com bubble washed people away. We're seeing some rise in entrepreneurship again with crypto, I think. But is this stuff really being an entrepreneur? I mean, if a wave happens, the dot-com bubble, crypto, and you're not doing anything other than going along for the ride with no particular plan, it's not really being an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is something visceral. It's deep down. And there's a starting point. There's a starting point for being an entrepreneur. Where I'm going to go today, I'm going to bring in 3 different pieces, things that I did not write, but that are really great to me. A very old Tim Ferriss blog post called The Top 5 Reasons to be a Jack of All Trades, first. Second, why entrepreneurs start companies rather than join them, by a guy named Steve Blank, venture capitalist. And a new white paper, well, a relatively new white paper in the last year, Asymmetric Information and Entrepreneurship. I want to start with Steve's piece, though, because this really gets at the heart of the matter. The first step for being an entrepreneur. Why do entrepreneurs start companies rather than join them? I mean, Steve goes on to say, if you would have asked me, why have I gravitated to startups rather than work in large companies? He says, I would have answered with, I want to be my own boss. I love risk, flexible work hours. I want to work on tough problems that matter. I have a vision and I want to see it through. I saw a better opportunity and grabbed it. And these are all the typical things that I think myself. And just to go to the very beginning of this and outline a perspective, being an entrepreneur, if you're going to trade, you're really an entrepreneur. Now, you might not embrace it completely. You might argue and say, well, Mike, you just said 99% of people are not entrepreneurs. Well, they're really not. But my point is that if you go down this direction of trying to make a dollar outside of the system being you working for the man, you're going down the path of being an entrepreneur. Maybe it's very slow and it never really happens in its fullest form, but you're going down that path. But Steve really breaks it down at its root, at its core. He says, it never crossed my mind that I gravitated to startups because I thought more of my abilities than the value a large company would put on them. That is it. Now, Steve is going ahead and he's pulling from this white paper that I just mentioned, and I'm going to quote from that in a second, Asymmetric Information and Entrepreneurship. And as Steve says, the author's conclusion, entrepreneurs think they are better than their resumes show and realize they can make more money by going it alone. And in most cases, they're right. I mentioned this to some friends, associates. They immediately said, oh, that's common sense. I already know that. Not really. That is a very novel take because what it's really saying is for those of us that are entrepreneurs, myself included, we had basically shitty grades. So nobody wanted to hire us. If our resume would have looked like what the employers wanted, we would have gone down a different path. they would have accepted us into that, the corporate world. But when you sit down with the corporate hiring person and your CV does not look especially grand for whatever reason, they don't hire you. They don't want you. And then it becomes a little bit of the chip on the shoulder. Oh, they don't want me? And then at that moment, your eyes widen. You see things differently. Because you've just been told that you will not play on this playground. You will not eat at this lunch counter. You will not come in this room. You are not allowed in Skull and Bones at some Ivy League institution. You, my friend, are persona non grata. Go away. And that causes an opening. You see the playing field differently. This happened to myself in the mid-1990s. All of a sudden, when the respectable, reputable people don't want you, you're on your own. When you're on your own, you're more resourceful. Things appear brighter that you might not have noticed before, because before, all you were doing was going down the path of least resistance, the path to go work for the corporation. So why pay attention to all the other stuff you're not supposed to pay attention to? Just pay attention to what the corporation wants. Let me quote a little bit more from Steve's blog passage. Lemons versus cherries. The most provocative conclusion in the paper is that asymmetric information about ability leads existing companies to employ only lemons, relatively unproductive workers. The talented and more productive choose entrepreneurship. Asymmetric information is when one party has more or better information than the other. In this case, the entrepreneurs know something potential employers don't, that nowhere on their resume does it show resiliency, curiosity, agility, resourcefulness, pattern recognition, tenacity, and having a passion for products. This implication that entrepreneurs are in fact cherries contrasts with a large body of literature in social science, which says that entrepreneurs are the lemons, those who cannot find, cannot hold, or cannot stand real jobs. What's so great about that passage? Any young person you know today that is signed up to go to college as a freshman, they're not thinking that at all. They're thinking, if I go to this school and I give them my money, I will get a CV that looks good and signals to the employer when I'm 22 or 23 that I'm acceptable and I will be fairly valued. God, we've got this whole thing wrong. The whole thing is upside down. So yeah, my associate that said, yes, this is common sense. Well, he's an entrepreneur. It's common sense to a degree, but I'm not so sure he's really thought about the fact that from a bell curve perspective, yeah, perhaps he's the entrepreneur outlier with the great grades that just never really wanted to be in the corporate world for whatever reason. But it's usually not like that. To quote Steve a little bit more, surprisingly, the company that best epitomized this was not some old line manufacturing company, but Google. When Marissa Mayer ran products at Google, the New York Times described her hiring process. Quote, more often than not, she relies on charts, graphs, and quantitative analysis as a foundation for a decision, particularly when it comes to evaluating people. At a recent personnel meeting, she homes in on the grade point averages and SAT scores to narrow a list of candidates, many having graduated from Ivy League schools. One candidate got a C in macroeconomics. Quote, that's troubling to me, end quote, Mrs. Mayer says. Quote, good students are good at all things, end quote. What's so great about that is what's left out. And Steve, to continue quoting Steve Blank, he says, really? What a perfect example of adverse signaling. No wonder the most successful Google products, other than search, have been acquisitions of startups, not internal products. YouTube, Android, DoubleClick, Keyhole, the Maps program, Waze, were started and run by entrepreneurs. The type of people Google and Marissa Mayer would not and did not hire started the companies they bought. Let me take a side tangent for a moment. And I'm not so sure if everyone can see how this all weaves together. In my mind, it all weaves together because when you start putting the word asymmetric out there, well, that's trend following 101. I mean, trend following is all about finding that asymmetric bet, the big move. Now, you're going to take little gambles here and there. They're not going to work out, but you're chasing the asymmetric market move, just like the entrepreneur is chasing the asymmetric business move. It's the same thinking. We can dicker and argue over words and what the particular analysis of the thing that we're even talking about, trading, entrepreneurship, doesn't really make a difference. It's the same principle. You don't get asymmetric gains by working for the man. You don't get asymmetric gains by buying a Vanguard index fund. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working for the man or having a Vanguard index fund. But just look the fuck in the mirror and decide who you want to be, and don't pretend what I'm saying right now, quoting these 3 pieces of work, are incorrect, because they're not. They're spot on. So the trick, the challenge, as we all navigate life, do we want asymmetric or do we not? Do you want the chance for the exponential move or do you not? I think this is why people love to play the lottery. They love to gamble because they don't want to do the work to really put themselves in a position to find an asymmetric bet, to get to that place where you might get that gain, the asymmetric gain. They don't really want to do the work to get there. And that's where Tim Ferriss's blog passage in a moment comes in. But they really don't want to do the work to get there. But they know they want to be there. And so what do? What's the easiest way to pretend that you can get an asymmetric gain by doing nothing? Well, playing the slot machine, buying a lottery ticket. It's fool's gold. It never works. Well, actually, it does work. It works for that one person in a couple 100 million who then wins the big one, and that keeps everybody else motivated to keep thinking they can win themselves. The passages that I just read, though, come from this paper, Asymmetric Information and Entrepreneurship. I want to read a few passages from that piece. From the introduction, and I quote, Hewlett-Packard apparently denied Steve Jobs' position for employment in 1977 because he lacked a degree. Jobs had dropped out of Reed College in 1972. And just recently, Twitter and Facebook rejected San Jose State's dropout of the year, John Kuhn, his job application. They rejected it. And a year later, he founded WhatsApp, a company he would then sell 5 years later to Facebook for $19 billion. DJ Patel's Indian geology degree was not recognized by U.S. employers when he arrived in 1997, so he worked in the fast food industry. Now he owns more than a dozen pizza franchises near Atlanta, Georgia. How general is the experience of Jobs, Kuhn, and Patel, all of whom became entrepreneurs after prospective employers overlooked their talents, evidently due to insufficient credentials? Well, this paper goes into the details, and their experience is a lot more normal than we think. That rejection, not having the CV credentials, the resume credentials, that's the jumping off point. To quote from the authors in the white paper a little bit more, asymmetric information about ability pushes the most productive workers into entrepreneurship in search of higher earnings. Thus, the puzzle of entrepreneurship earnings is intimately tied to why an individual sets up his own firm. In light of our findings, the notion of entrepreneurial success becomes more subtle because although those driven into entrepreneurship by asymmetric information earn more than similarly credentialed employees, their selection into the occupation may still be adverse. They may be even more productive as employees, but the market failed to see it. Policies that stimulate entrepreneurship will only generate aggregate wealth if those that start firms are truly more productive as entrepreneurs. For example, if educational institutions provide more precise signals of ability, the information asymmetry and with it adverse selection could be reduced. Although this may imply less entrepreneurship, those who choose it will do so because it is where they are most productive. Conversely, if educational institutions, which have traditionally served a credentialing purpose, i.e. business schools, dilute their signals through policies such as the non-disclosure of student grades to employers, entrepreneurship may rise without stimulating growth. Our findings may also explain why several groups with less credible ability signals, such as immigrants, gravitate toward entrepreneurship, and why families and friends are a dominant source of financing for early stage ventures when asymmetric information about entrepreneurs' quality is greatest, end quote. Now, what I love about this paper is the novel way that they look at it and defined in the data set, and they've got 10,000 plus people they've looked through, but defined in the data set this idea that entrepreneurship starts with essentially a rejection. Because if you're accepted by the corporation, you just go along for the ride and you try and get your gold watch and all that other kind of stuff, and you don't even go down the entrepreneurial path. You don't even have that wake up moment that I was speaking about. But their conclusion is one, clearly they're basically saying this could happen. Now, for me, somebody who's actually spent time on college campuses, of course, these guys have spent time on college campuses too. But just tell me, explain to me how college campuses, the bastion of just the most inefficient way to learn something. Of course, yes, if you're going to learn engineering, if you're going to learn math, medicine, fantastic. That's not going to change. But everything else on college campuses, it's just one big subjective debate. And how in the world are you ever going to motivate students to get them to the point to where their CVs signal, oh, this person is being undervalued and their grades suck or whatever. This person is being undervalued. So now you will value them higher and they will be picked and selected by the corporation. This is the most pie in the sky thing ever. So I give the authors credit for opening up the discussion and pointing out how cool is that? And I look at myself in the mirror, a guy with bad grades. But I just saw that there was an undervalue. I never understood how the damn grades directly connected to value. They would connect to the value of working for somebody and whatever they wanted to give me. But that's just slavery. That's not value creation. Now, the interesting thing also about their paper is they point out that if you go down this entrepreneurial path, and here's where it kind of dovetails with trend following again, if you go down this entrepreneurial path, it's volatile. You're going to make more, but it's not going to look smooth along the way. Now, I wonder, I don't talk to too many people about this, but I wonder how many, quote, entrepreneurs have not been able to hack it because the monthly check was not the same every month. You see, that monthly check, the same every month, that drives the 99%. They must have it. Now, let's take a step back for a second, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, Mike, you seem to be depressingly telling me I'm one of the 99%, so I'm a bad person. I'm not saying that at all. But this is a handy way to look at everything from a 360-degree perspective. Because if you want to stay in the secure position, then maybe that means you hire the trend-following trader to work for you. You hire the angel investor to put your money into startups. You keep an arm's length distance. But you still got to have an understanding of the damn thing. You still have to know how an angel investor works. You still have to know how a trend-following trader works if you're going to give them your capital. Because otherwise, if they don't make money in a straight line, how the hell are you going to emotionally handle it? You're not. So my point today is not to pick sides. It's to paint the landscape, to show you where everything sits. And I do find it is so damn interesting when you start to contrast being an entrepreneur with something like trend following trading or venture capital. It's the exact same headspace. We're just screwing around with definitions, screwing around with wording, but it principally, same stuff. Now, I mentioned the author Tim Ferriss at the top of this show, and he has a blog post that I want to add into this, because once you go down the path, for whatever reason, once you go down the path of this entrepreneurship direction, now something else happens. Mindset. Do you have the right mindset? And Tim has this fantastic piece. He didn't write it yesterday. Like most of Tim Ferriss's content, it's pretty evergreen. I want to read a few passages. First, boredom is failure. In a first world economy where we have the physical necessities covered with even low-class income, Maslow's hierarchy of needs drives us to need more for any measure of comparative success. Lack of intellectual stimulation, not superlative material wealth, is what drives us to depression and emotional bankruptcy. Generalizing and experimenting prevents this, while over-specialization guarantees it. The generalizing and the experimenting is what happens when the employer says, Covel, your CV looks like shit. We're not hiring you. Then what happens to the entrepreneur? I'm talking in the third person here. But what happens to entrepreneur Covel when he's rejected? Well, he must go experiment. He must generalize. Because if you're rejected and you're not part of the system and you don't have a narrow specialization, guess what? To get anything off the ground, you've got to be a generalist. You've got to know how to create a web page. You've got to know how to create a product. All the details that go into that. Now, on the flip side, what Tim says at the end there, while over-specialization guarantees it. Over-specialization guaranteeing the depression and the emotional bankruptcy. So now I say throughout this episode, I'm not trying to take a stab at those folks that are in the corporate world. But Tim is pointing out that the experimenting, the generalization, having a wide approach keeps the mind sound. If you have the perfect CV and you're hired by Marissa Mayer at Google, I don't know if she's still there or not. I have no idea. I don't keep track of this shit. But if you're hired by Marissa Mayer at Google and you've got the perfect resume from MIT, you've got the highest grades, they take you in the front door at Google, they give you a great contract, it looks fantastic. They sit you down in a chair and they say, do this fucking job, sir, and do it every day. You'll be wealthy. Now do this job every day. That's a great bet to accept as a young person. 2, 3, 5, 10 years later, now what? That's exactly where Tim Ferriss is going with his perspective on boredom as failure, which goes right back to the Steve Blank blog post that I've read some from on this episode, and the white paper, the Asymmetric Entrepreneurship white paper. These things just all connect. What I like about what Tim's doing, though, is Tim takes this to the next step. The next point Tim makes. Diversity of intellectual playgrounds breeds confidence instead of fear of the unknown. It also breeds empathy with the broadest range of human conditions and appreciation of the broadest range of human accomplishments. The alternative is the defensive xenophobia and smugness uniquely common to those whose identities are defined by their job title or single skill, which they pursue out of obligation and not enjoyment. Now keep playing back these passages from these 3 different pieces. You show up with a CV out of school. You've been told your whole life, just memorize everything. You show up with a CV, but your grades are crap. So you go the other direction. You don't necessarily have any idea that what Tim Ferriss is saying here is true. But by forcing yourself, and you've only been forced to do this because you had bad grades like me, but you force yourself to go down that direction. And then you wake up 5-10 years later and you read Ferriss's blog post and you're like, spot on. I did not even know I was learning that. I did not even know that that was becoming part of the fiber of my being. Tim's last big point, which I just love because this is the way I look at the world. It's absolutely more fun to go down the entrepreneur path. It doesn't seem like that from the outside if you're not doing it because it can be more volatile. The paydays are irregular. But you do got that asymmetric opportunity built into it. You don't get that with the steady Eddie from the corporation. And I love this last little passage from Tim. Quote, "The specialist who imprisons himself in self-inflicted one-dimensionality, pursuing an impossible perfection, spends decades stagnant or making imperceptible incremental improvements while the curious generalist consistently measures improvement in quantum leaps," otherwise known as asymmetric. It's only the latter who enjoys the process of pursuing excellence. Every conversation I've ever had with Larry Hite, the famed trader, Larry talks about asymmetric. Asymmetric information, asymmetric gains, asymmetric bets. That's the way his mind works. That's all he talks about. That doesn't mean he's not going to take small bets along the way and lose. He will. But he's playing the game for the asymmetric. He's willing to be variable in his life in the sense that linear is not the path, which is exactly what Tim is saying here. At the end of the day, I would argue that the pursuit of an asymmetric gain, while risky on the face of it, gives you the best chance for long-term happiness, the best chance to feel good about yourself every day, the best chance to do something big. How do you do something big? When you work for the man. The man keeps your mind occupied with his adventure. You're helping him to get his adventure done. And look, big picture here. The idea is to put the playing field on the table and let everybody, no matter where they sit, entrepreneur or working for the man, to make a better decision right now. Because all we have is right now. We don't have tomorrow. We don't have yesterday. Yesterday don't matter if it's gone, as Mick Jagger sang in Ruby Tuesday with the Rolling Stones. Yesterday don't matter if it's gone. So my whole point today is not to lament the past or try and predict the future. It's to say, let's listen, let's learn from some very bright minds and make better decisions. Better decisions means better process. Better process, if played over time, equals better outcomes. This is the game. I wish they taught me this stuff in school, but they sure as hell did not. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.